What happens when the most powerful general on Earth decides the president is beneath him? Picture this. A man wades through ocean water. He wears dark glasses. A pipe hangs from his mouth. He looks like a god walking among men. This is Douglas MacArthur. Now picture another man. He sits at a plain desk, wears a simple suit. No one thinks he looks special. This is Harry Truman. One man commanded armies, the other commanded the Constitution. Both believed they were saving America, but only one was allowed to decide. MacArthur insulted his president. He refused to obey orders. He threatened the very foundation of American democracy. If Truman backed down, the military would no longer answer to the people. This is the story of that fight. Harry Truman never expected to be president. He grew up in Missouri. His family was not rich. They were not powerful. Harry wore thick glasses. Other kids made fun of him, but he worked hard. He read books. He learned about history. When World War I came, Harry joined the army. He led artillery troops in France. The guns were loud. The war was terrible. But Harry did his job. He brought his men home alive. After the war, Harry went into politics. He was not handsome. He was not smooth. But he was honest. People trusted him. He worked his way up through the system. He became a senator. He did the hard work no one else wanted to do. Then Franklin Roosevelt died. Suddenly, Harry Truman was president. He had not asked for this. He was scared, but he had a job to do. Therefore, Harry learned fast. He made big decisions. He ended World War II. He dropped atomic bombs on Japan. He created the United Nations. He stood up to the Soviet Union. People started to respect him, but Harry never forgot where he came from. He stayed plain. He stayed direct. He believed in rules. He believed the president worked for the people. Douglas MacArthur was born into glory. His father was a famous general. His mother pushed him to be the best. Douglas went to West Point. He got the highest grades in 25 years. He stood tall. He spoke like a poet. Everyone knew he was special. When World War I came, Douglas was brave. He won many medals. He led from the front. Soldiers loved him. Generals feared him. He rose fast through the ranks, but Douglas had a big ego. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. He posed for photos. He made dramatic speeches. He built his own legend. When World War II started, Douglas commanded the Pacific. He fought Japan island by island. The war was brutal, but Douglas won. He accepted Japan's surrender. He ruled Japan like a king afterward. He rebuilt their whole country. Therefore, Douglas became a legend. Americans saw him as the greatest general alive. Newspapers called him a genius. Some called him America's Caesar. He started to believe it himself. He wore special uniforms. He carried a corn cob pipe. He wore aviator sunglasses. Everything he did looked dramatic. He made sure cameras caught it all. But Douglas had a problem. He forgot he served someone. He forgot presidents give orders to generals, not the other way around. By 1950, these two men were on a collision course. Truman believed in the system. The president commanded. Generals obeyed. That was democracy. That was the Constitution. No exceptions. But MacArthur believed in destiny. He thought his military genius gave him special rights. He thought he understood war better than any politician. Therefore, he thought he should make the big decision. They were both strong men. They both loved America, but they had very different ideas about who should lead it. Early signs showed trouble ahead. MacArthur would ignore messages from Washington. He would make his own plans. He would talk to the press without permission. He acted like he ran his own country in the Pacific. Truman noticed this. He did not like it. But the war was over. Things were calm. Therefore, Truman let it go, for now. But a storm was building. Korea was about to explode. And when it did, these two men would finally clash. One believed in civilian rule. The other believed in his own greatness. Something had to break. June 25th, 1950. North Korea invaded South Korea. Communist troops poured across the border. They had Soviet tanks. They had artillery. They crushed the South Korean army in days. The capital city of Seoul fell fast. This was a crisis. If Korea fell, maybe Japan would fall next. Maybe all of Asia would turn communist. So the Cold War was getting hot. Truman had to act fast. Therefore, he went to the United Nations. He got approval for military action. American troops would defend South Korea. The mission was clear: push the invaders back, restore the border, stop communist expansion. But Truman also decided something else. This would be a limited war. No nuclear weapons, no attacks on China, no World War III. Just defend South Korea and stop. MacArthur was put in charge. He commanded all UN forces in Korea. He was the obvious choice. He knew Asia. He had experience. He was already based in Japan, but MacArthur had different ideas about how to fight. At first, things went badly. North Korean forces pushed south. American troops were not ready. They lacked supplies, they lacked training. They fell back day after day. Seoul was lost. The southern port of Pusan was surrounded. It looked like America might lose. The press started asking hard questions. And tough enough? Was America still strong? But MacArthur had a plan, a risky plan, a bold plan. He wanted to land troops at Incheon. This was a port city behind enemy lines. The tides there were terrible. The beaches were wrong. Every military expert said it was impossible. But MacArthur insisted. Therefore, Truman let him try. September 15th, 1950. The Incheon landing happened. It worked. It worked perfectly. American Marines landed. They cut North Korean supply lines. The enemy army collapsed. Seoul was retaken. The war turned around completely. MacArthur was a genius again. The press praised him. Politicians praised him. Even Truman praised him. It was one of history's greatest military moves. Therefore, MacArthur's ego grew bigger. He started to think he could do anything. He started to think he knew better than everyone in Washington. After Incheon, MacArthur wanted more. Why just restore the border? Why not destroy North Korea completely? Why not reunify all of Korea under democracy? Truman was nervous. China sat right across the border. If American troops went too far north, China might enter the war. That would be a disaster, but MacArthur promised China would not fight. He said they were too weak. He said they were too scared. He told Truman not to worry. Therefore, Truman gave permission. American troops could cross into North Korea. They could push to the Chinese border. But they had to be careful. MacArthur was not careful. His troops raced north. They split into two columns. They spread out too far. They ignored intelligence reports about Chinese troops massing across the border. Then November came and everything went wrong. China attacked. Not with hundreds of soldiers, not with thousands, with 300,000 soldiers. They poured across the border in waves. They attacked at night. They used bugles and whistles. They surrounded American positions. It was a nightmare. American troops fell back. They fell back fast. It was the longest retreat in American military history. Thousands died. Thousands more were captured. Seoul fell again. MacArthur was shocked. His intelligence had been completely wrong. His strategy had failed. His troops were in chaos. But MacArthur did not blame himself. Therefore, he blamed Truman. He blamed Washington. He blamed politicians for tying his hands. He started saying things, dangerous things. He told reporters that he could win if politicians let him. He said he should bomb Chinese cities. He said he should use nuclear weapons. He said he should invade China itself. Truman was furious. This was not MacArthur's decision to make. The president decided about nuclear weapons. The president decided about starting wars with China. But MacArthur would not stop talking. Therefore, the real conflict was beginning. Not between America and communism, between a president and a general, between democracy and ego. MacArthur started acting like he was in charge, not just of the war, of American foreign policy itself. He gave interviews without permission. He criticized Truman's strategy in public. He sent messages to newspapers. He talked to congressmen behind Truman's back. This was not normal. Generals do not make policy. They follow orders. They advise in private. They obey in public. That is how democracy works. But MacArthur thought the rules did not apply to him. Therefore, he kept talking. And talking and talking. He said Truman was soft on communism. He said limited war was a stupid idea. He said America should hit China with everything it had. Bombs, nukes, full invasion. Truman tried to be patient. He sent messages to MacArthur. Stop talking to the press. Follow the chain of command. Stick to the strategy. But MacArthur ignored him. He thought he was too important to be silent. He thought his military genius gave him special rights. Therefore, the situation got worse. In March 1951, MacArthur made his biggest mistake yet. Truman was working on a peace offer. He wanted to negotiate with China and North Korea. He wanted to end the war. He was ready to announce it to the world. But MacArthur found out about it, and he decided to wreck it. He issued his own statement to the enemy. He threatened China. He said he could destroy their army anytime. He said they should surrender to him personally. He made it sound like America wanted total war. This destroyed Truman's peace plan. China was insulted. They refused to negotiate. The war would continue. Truman was shocked. This was insubordination. This was sabotage. A general had just overruled the president's foreign policy. But MacArthur did not care. He thought he was saving America from weakness. Therefore, he kept going. Then came The letter that A congressman asked MacArthur for his views on the war. MacArthur wrote back. He criticized Truman's entire strategy. He said there was no substitute for victory. He said limited war was immoral. Then the congressman read the letter on the floor of Congress, out loud, for everyone to hear. This was it. This was open defiance. A general was publicly calling his president a fool. A general was trying to force America into a bigger war. Truman had to decide. Could he let this stand? Could a general be allowed to challenge civilian authority? Could democracy survive if the military stopped obeying? The answer was no. Therefore, Truman made his choice. MacArthur had to go. But firing MacArthur would be political suicide. Everyone knew that. MacArthur was more popular than Truman. Polls showed it clearly. Americans loved MacArthur. They saw him as a hero, a winner, a legend. Truman's approval rating was already low. The Korean War was unpopular. People were tired. They wanted someone to blame. If Truman fired MacArthur, people would turn on him. They would call him a traitor. They would say he was helping communists. His career would be over. Truman knew all this. His advisors warned him. His friends warned him. Even his wife worried. But Truman thought about the Constitution. He thought about democracy. He thought about future presidents. If MacArthur won this fight, what general would ever obey orders again? Therefore, Truman made his decision. He would rather lose his career than lose the Republic. Truman talked to his top generals. He asked them what they thought. Should MacArthur be fired? They all said yes. Every single one. The Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed. MacArthur had gone too far. He was risking World War III. He was ignoring orders. He had to be stopped. This made Truman feel better. He was not alone. The military leadership knew MacArthur was wrong, but knowing it was right did not make it easy. Truman still had to give the order. He still had to face the public anger. He still had to stand firm. On April 9, 1951, Truman made it official. He signed the order. Douglas MacArthur was relieved of command, effective immediately, but there was a problem. The press found out before MacArthur did. Therefore, Truman had to rush the announcement. He called a press conference for 1 a.m. Reporters scrambled to get there. At 1 a.m. on April 11, 1951, Truman announced it to the world. Douglas MacArthur was fired. The explosion was instant. America erupted in anger. People were furious. How dare Truman fire MacArthur? How dare he insult a war hero? How dare he side with communists over America's greatest general? Thousands of telegrams flooded the White House. Almost all of them were angry. People called Truman a traitor. They called him a coward. They called him worse things than that. State legislatures passed resolutions condemning Truman. Cities flew their flags at half-staff. It was like a national hero had died. Some politicians called for impeachment. They said Truman had committed treason. They said he should be removed from office immediately. Truman knew this would happen. But knowing it and living through it were different things. It hurt. It was brutal. But he did not back down. Therefore, Truman prepared to defend his decision. He knew history would judge him. He hoped history would understand. MacArthur flew home from Tokyo. He had not been in America for 14 years. 14 years abroad. He was almost mythical to Americans now. When his plane landed, crowds went wild. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets. They cheered, they cried, they waved flags, they treated him like a returning king. MacArthur loved it. This was his moment. He could prove Truman wrong. He could show America who the real leader was. Congress invited him to speak, not just any speech, a joint session, the highest honor they could give. On April 19, 1951, MacArthur walked into the Capitol building. The room was packed. Senators, representatives, Supreme Court justices, military officers, everyone who mattered in Washington was there. MacArthur spoke for 34 minutes. It was pure theatre. His voice rose and fell. He quoted military sayings. He talked about duty and honor and country. Then he ended with his most famous line, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." The room exploded in applause. Grown men cried. Some representatives stood and clapped for minutes. It was one of the most dramatic moments in congressional history. Therefore, it looked like MacArthur had won. Public opinion was on his side. Congress loved him. Truman looked small by comparison, but Truman was not done fighting. Truman had something MacArthur did not have. The truth. The Senate opened hearings. They called it an investigation into MacArthur's firing, but really it was a trial. Was Truman right or wrong? Was MacArthur a hero or a danger? For weeks, military leaders testified, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, generals who had worked with MacArthur, and they all said the same thing. MacArthur was wrong. His strategy would have started World War III. China and the Soviet Union would have joined together, nuclear weapons would have been used, millions would have died. MacArthur wanted to bomb Chinese cities, but China had a treaty with the Soviet Union. If America attacked China, the Soviets would have to respond. That meant nuclear war. That meant the end of civilization. Truman's limited war strategy made sense. Hold the line in Korea, contain communism, but do not risk destroying the world. Therefore, the military backed Truman. Even though MacArthur was popular, he was dangerous. Even though people loved him, he was wrong. Slowly, public opinion started to shift. People learned more about what MacArthur really wanted. Total war with China, maybe nuclear weapons, maybe World War III. Americans were tired. They didn't want another huge war. They had just finished World War II 5 years ago. Korea was already costing thousands of lives. Did they really want to fight China too? Did they want to risk nuclear war? Did they want their sons to die in another massive conflict? The answer was no. Therefore, people started to understand Truman's choice. MacArthur gave more speeches, he went on a speaking tour, but his message stayed the same. Total victory, no compromise, hit them with everything. But the more he talked, the more people worried. This man wanted to start World War III. This man thought he knew better than everyone else. This man would not obey orders. Maybe Truman was right. Maybe generals should not make these decisions. Maybe presidents exist for a reason. The Constitution was clear. The president is commander-in-chief, not the generals, not the admirals. The president, a civilian, someone elected by the people. This was not an accident. America's founders feared military rule. They had fought against King George's army. They knew what happened when soldiers had too much power. Therefore, they put civilians in charge. The president commanded the military. Congress declared war. The people decided through elections. MacArthur threatened all of that. If he could ignore Truman, any general could ignore any president. If he could make his own foreign policy, the military would be in charge, not the people. That was not democracy. That was something else. Something dangerous. Truman understood this. Therefore, he stood firm. He took the political hit. He let people call him names. He let his popularity crash. Because some things mattered more than popularity. The Constitution mattered more. Democracy mattered more. Civilian control mattered more. This was Truman's real fight. Not against communism, not against Korea, against the idea that military genius trumped democratic rule. And he was winning. The day Truman fired MacArthur changed America forever. April 11, 1951. The announcement went out at 1 in the morning. Reporters raced to file stories. Newspapers printed special editions. Radio stations interrupted programming. America woke up to shocking news. The most famous general in the country was fired. The president had done the unthinkable. But Truman did not hesitate. He wrote in his diary that night. He said, MacArthur left him no choice. Orders must be obeyed. That was that. Truman's staff worried. They knew a storm was coming, but Truman stayed calm. He had made the right choice. Therefore, he would deal with the consequences. The consequences came fast and hard. Politicians attacked from all sides. Republicans smelled blood. They had a weapon against Truman now. They could call him weak. They could call him a communist sympathizer. Senator Joseph McCarthy led the charge. He said Truman fired MacArthur to help the communists. He said it was treason. His words were extreme, but people listened. Other senators piled on. They demanded investigations. They called Truman names on the Senate floor. They said he should be impeached. The media mostly sided with MacArthur too. Newspaper editorials criticized Truman. Columnists called him petty and jealous. They said he fired MacArthur because the general was more popular. Life magazine put MacArthur on the cover. Time magazine did too. They treated him like a martyr, a hero brought down by small-minded politicians. Therefore, Truman stood almost alone. His approval rating crashed. Only 23% of Americans approved of his job performance. It was one of the lowest ratings ever recorded. But Truman had allies, smart people, people who understood what was really at stake. The military establishment backed Truman, quietly at first, then more openly. General Omar Bradley testified before Congress. He was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He had fought in World War II. Everyone respected him. Bradley said something important. He said MacArthur's strategy would lead to the wrong war, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, and with the wrong enemy. Those words hit hard. This was not a politician talking. This was a general, a war hero, someone who understood combat. Bradley explained the problem. If America attacked China, the Soviet Union would respond. Then America would be fighting two massive communist powers at once. In Asia, far from home, with supply lines stretched thin. That was suicide. That was exactly what the Soviets wanted. Tie up American forces in Asia, leave Europe undefended, then take over Western Europe. MacArthur's strategy played into enemy hands. Truman's limited war doctrine was smarter. Contain communism, but do not overextend. Therefore, military experts sided with Truman, even if the public did not understand yet. MacArthur's farewell speech to Congress was powerful, but it was also revealing. He talked about total victory. He said there was no substitute for winning. He said America should never accept less than complete triumph. It sounded heroic, but it was also dangerous thinking. What about nuclear war? What about millions of deaths? What about the survival of civilization? Were those acceptable prices for military victory? Truman said no. Some wars could not be won completely. Some wars had to be limited because the alternative was too terrible. This was a new kind of thinking. In World War II, America fought for total victory, unconditional surrender, complete destruction of the enemy. But World War III could not be fought that way because both sides had nuclear weapons now. Total war meant total destruction for everyone. Therefore, America needed a new strategy: containment, limited war, careful escalation control. It was less satisfying than total victory, but it was smarter. It was safer. MacArthur could not accept this. He was a World War II general living in a nuclear age. His thinking was outdated, dangerous. Truman understood the new reality. Therefore, he was right to fire him. The public anger slowly faded. Not immediately, not easily, but gradually. People learned more about what MacArthur wanted. They learned about the risk of World War III. They learned about nuclear weapons and Soviet treaties and Chinese armies. They started to think, did they really want total war? Did they want their children to fight in World War III? Did they want cities destroyed by nuclear bombs? The answer was no. Therefore, they started to see Truman's point. MacArthur kept giving speeches, but he started to repeat himself. His message never changed. Total victory. Hit them hard. No compromise. After a while, people got tired of it. The world was more complicated than MacArthur admitted. His answers were too simple, too dangerous. His political career went nowhere. Some people wanted him to run for president in 1952, but his campaign never took off. People liked him as a general, but not as a president, not as a politician. Therefore, MacArthur faded away, just like he said old soldiers do. He lived quietly. He gave occasional speeches, but his moment was over. Truman left office in 1953. His approval rating was still low. People still remembered Korea. They still remembered the anger. But something important had happened. The Constitution survived. Civilian control survived. Democracy survived. A general tried to take control of foreign policy, and a president stopped him. The system worked exactly as designed. That was Truman's real victory. Not popularity, not approval ratings, but preserving the foundation of American democracy. And history would remember. History's judgment took time, but it was decisive. In 1951, most Americans thought Truman was wrong. They thought he had betrayed a hero. They thought he was weak. But decades later, historians told a different story. They said Truman was right. They said he saved American democracy. They said he was brave. What changed? People learned the truth. They learned what MacArthur really wanted. They learned how close America came to disaster. Therefore, Truman's reputation grew. By the time he died in 1972, people saw him differently. He was not the villain anymore. He was the defender of democracy. The Senate hearings revealed important facts that did not make headlines at the time, but facts that mattered. MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons in Korea, not as a last resort, as a regular weapon. He wanted to drop dozens of atomic bombs along the Chinese border, create a radioactive barrier, make it impossible for Chinese troops to cross. This was insane. The fallout would kill millions. It would poison the land for generations. It would make America look like a monster to the world. MacArthur also wanted to invade China itself. Land American troops on the Chinese coast march toward Beijing, overthrow the communist government. But China had 600 million people. America could not occupy it. America could barely handle Korea. An invasion of China would be Vietnam times 10 times 20. And then there was the Soviet Union. They had a defense treaty with China. If America invaded China, the Soviets would attack. In Korea, in Europe, maybe in America itself. That meant World War III. That meant nuclear war. That meant the end of civilization as we knew it. Therefore, Truman's decision was not just right. It was necessary. MacArthur had to be stopped before he started a war that could destroy the world. The containment doctrine won. This was Truman's strategy for fighting communism. Do not try to destroy communist countries. That was too risky. Instead, contain them, stop them from spreading, build walls around them, wait for them to collapse from within. It took 40 years, but it worked. The Soviet Union fell in 1991, not from war, from economic failure, from the weight of their own system. Communism in China changed too. They opened up to trade, they became more capitalist, they were still authoritarian, but not the same threat they were in 1951. Containment was patient, it was careful, it was not emotionally satisfying, but it was smart. Therefore, it succeeded where MacArthur's strategy would have failed. History proved Truman right. Limited war made sense. Careful escalation made sense. Nuclear restraint made sense. MacArthur's total war doctrine belonged to the past, to World War II, to a time before nuclear weapons. It could not work in the modern world. The precedent Truman set was crucial. No general challenged a president that way again. When President Kennedy faced generals who wanted to invade Cuba in 1962, he said no, and they obeyed. Because Truman showed that presidents decide, not generals. When President Johnson escalated the Vietnam War, generals advised him, but they did not override him, because the chain of command was clear. Even when generals disagreed with presidents, they stayed quiet publicly. They gave advice in private. They resigned if they could not support policy, but they did not stage public rebellions. Therefore, American democracy remained strong. The military stayed under civilian control. The system worked because Truman stood firm in 1951. Imagine if Truman had backed down. If MacArthur had won, future generals would have learned a lesson. If you're popular enough, you can ignore the president. If you're famous enough, you make your own rules. That would have destroyed civilian control. The military would become a separate power. They would make their own foreign policy. They would decide when to go to war. That is not democracy. That is military rule. That is what America's founders tried to prevent. Truman saved the republic by firing one general, by standing firm when everyone attacked him, by choosing the Constitution over popularity. MacArthur's decline was sad in some ways. He had been a great general. He won brilliant victories. He rebuilt Japan. He served his country for 52 years. But he could not let go. He could not accept limits. He thought his genius put him above the rule. Therefore, his legacy became complicated. People remembered his military victories, but they also remembered his defiance, his ego, his willingness to risk everything for his own vision. He died in 1964. He was 84 years old. His funeral was grand. Military honors, flags at half-staff, speeches about his greatness. But history's judgment was already set. He was a great general who forgot his place, a brilliant commander who threatened democracy, a war hero who had to be stopped. Truman left office in 1953. He went home to Missouri. He had no pension at first, no security detail. He was just a private citizen. He lived modestly. He walked the streets of Independence. He answered his own mail. He was the same plain man he always was. But over time, people came to see him clearly. He made hard choices. He stood alone when necessary. He put the country before his career. His decision to fire MacArthur was his bravest act. It almost destroyed him politically, but it saved American democracy. Therefore, history remembers Truman as a great president, not because he was popular, not because he won easy victories, but because he had courage when courage mattered most. The lesson is simple. Democracy requires leaders who put institutions before ego, who follow rules even when it hurts, who understand that no one is above the law, not even heroes. MacArthur forgot that. Truman never did, and that made all the difference.